This microphone's amazing.
All right.
You just sit right there. See, we're already getting in the red. See?
Shit,
So welcome to Pod Potatoes. This is Ed Pollard. This is about a podcast about working for a failing kung fu magazine called Black Belt Magazine.
Let's call it a suffering, an ailing. How about an ailing traditional, martial arts publication that got into the wrong hands.
Yeah.
It's owned by a collector who doesn't give a fuck about martial arts. He just worships Bruce Lee and wants to own the magazine that had him on the cover in '67 before he even made a movie and before anyone knew who the hell Bruce Lee was. So it's just a form of how would you call it, capitalist collecting. He's just someone collecting something.
Yeah, I went to a Black Belt magazine thing and they had Bruce Lee's underwear there.
Yeah, it was
skid marks and all.
Sexy. They had Bruce Lee dolls, so you could play dress up with Bruce Lee.
Dress up with Bruce Lee. Yeah, so it was mainly a magazine made to, and it had a lot of martial arts frauds too. There's this great series of articles on Bluetooth, on YouTube by, God, what is his name? Is it Mr. Pink? And he's chronicling.
Gene LaBelle?
Maybe. It's chronicling all of these different. There's some guy who's evidently some kung fu nerd, and he's chronicling all of the kung fu frauds and the martial arts frauds, like the guys who wrote all these books about being a ninja and said they were in the army, and the guy who did Bloodsport with the movie about who was it?
The actual guy?
The actual guy that said he was in the secret martial arts contest.
I've been away from
how he lied
for almost 8 years.
Everything was a lie.
I started to forget all
worked for the CIA, and Steven Seagal says he worked for the CIA, and just all these like martial arts frauds. It's so funny. I wish I could plug it.
See, the sad thing is,
just type in famous martial arts frauds on YouTube. Right. You'll see it.
Next chance I get, I promise. No, it's just there's definitely an element in martial arts of a certain kind of, macho, egotistic strutting. Like guys trying to be show-offs.
Who never got in a fight in their life.
There are others who are like extra humble, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they're masters, and you feel it. And they show you real things, and they're not busy trying to impress anybody. So there's actually more of that, but again, I'm not in that world. I wasn't a martial arts worshiper when I got there. I just wanted a job in publishing, and I ended up working there for almost 9 years, and I was basically the go-to guy for MMA because our editor didn't really care to go
they were clueless
to the events. Yeah,
they were in the fraud and myth of MMA, of kung fu and karate and martial arts. And then when the UFC came along, the UFC was like, well, all right, there's all these people that say all this bullshit. Let's see what they can do.
Put up or shut up. Yeah,
put up or shut up, and put them in the ring, and teeth were flying out into the audience. And when they first were doing the UFC, and the only rules were no kicking in the ball. No, you could kick in the ball.
No fish hooking. Oh, no.
Fish hooking.
There was ball punching going on in the early days.
And there was no biting, no eye gouging.
No eye gouging, no fish hooking, no biting. And that was pretty much it.
Hooking.
You could hit a guy in the back of the head.
Right.
You could punch him in the nuts.
Right. And you just couldn't, but you couldn't grab his lips and run in the other direction.
Right.
Which is fish hooking. Or stick your finger into someone's nose and try to rip their nose open.
Dirty wrestling moves.
Try to rip off their ears, or especially if you have cauliflower ears, it's really easy to grab them on and rip them off. And then also you can theoretically stick your fingers into someone's arm or leg it's in certain areas and grab the tendons and yank them.
And remove a tumor.
And yeah, remove a tumor. And that was actually a technique that was taught to me by a guy who in San Francisco, and there was some little old man up there who would teach some form of weird kung fu. And he would, people would come in every day though, like older guys, and he would challenge him because he's like, well, how do I know you can teach me anything? And he would just beat them up. He was just this little old Asian guy, and he would beat up these big guys every day. And they'd give him money and they'd start teaching him. But he taught me all these techniques. And a lot of it was basically keep people's hands away from your face. And we used to clench our hands like this. I would teach him jiu-jitsu, and he taught me this weird form of kung fu, and we would clench our hands like this and then try to keep the other person from getting to your fingers to like rip your fingers off. So these practices of like how to stop people from ripping your fingers off. We'd stand and we'd try to touch the other person's face, and we'd constantly move our hands away from keep the other person from striking, touching, grabbing our face, because the technique was grab the lips and run, get in the other direction, grab the nose. As soon as someone gets to your face, if you're in a fight in the street, you grab their face, you grab their lips, you stick your fingers in their eyes.
Very, very painful, yeah.
Get your hands on the face, throat, grab in the throat, get your fingers in the throat.
Balls.
Dirty fighting, balls. Pick the other person up by their balls and then slam their head on the ground by picking them up by the balls.
That'll catch them off guard.
Anything you could do. But so anyway, he taught me that, and I taught him jiu-jitsu. But that was the beginning of the UFC, and all these people that thought they had the great, kung fu secret were just getting the shit beat out of them. If you watch the early UFCs, you see just the people leaving there in just a bloody mess, who are these third-degree black belts in kung fu, and it's basically just bullshit, and they were just getting their asses handed to them by street brawlers like Tank, or just...
if you couldn't, a guy like Tank, if you can't get the job done in the first 2 or 3 minutes, he's going to run out of wind.
He's going to run out of wind. He's got a big beer belly.
But a lot of guys who are out there fighting are not athletes.
But and then the wrestlers.
Then UFC became an athletic thing because they started, putting time limits, and there were breaks. And you had to sit around and look at each other across the octagon and for a minute, and then they blew a little whistle, and then you went at each other again. And
what they found was the kickboxers could beat up all the strikers, all the kung fu guys and karate guys would all get beaten up by the kickboxers.
If you had Muay Thai and jiu-jitsu skills, you're pretty much ready.
And then the guys that had jiu-jitsu, no one knew how to stop that, which is where you grab somebody and you twist their arm and their leg and do something that's going to break it, or you choke them unconscious.
Submission skills.
And then the wrestlers also did great, except against the jiu-jitsu, because if you're the best kickboxer in the world and you're in there against even a college-level wrestler, even a high school-level wrestler, they're going to take you down, hold you down, and that's it. You got one chance to punch them or kick them as they're coming in, and after that, you're down on the ground. You have no idea how to get back up. You have no skills.
The Don Fry and Ken Shamrock era, where these were the basic 2 skills. Like if you had a guy who was a wrestler who could also fight standing up, then he had a pretty good chance against the Gracies of the world, who
couldn't get you down on the ground.
Couldn't take a hard shot to the face. If you knew how to deliver it, and then if they got you on the ground and you knew how to defend yourself.
Mostly what you see there in the UFC now on the ground is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You have to give them credit for that. But they said, we've improved Jiu-Jitsu, and then they went to Japan and fought, and then all get their arms broken by Sakuraba. Send him back send him back to Brazil with broken arms, and except Royce. And
oh man, that fight, that last fight they did at the Coliseum. I don't know, you went to that. That was kind of a farce.
It was a farce.
That went to referees and to the judges.
Right. So he was Royce Gracie. We don't need to go into the history of that, but But you were trying to get them to understand that they needed to do MMA, become an MMA magazine. That was martial arts. Now,
well, no, I mean,
they were still dealing with the myths and the frauds.
I didn't think they needed to be an MMA magazine. I think what they needed to do was acknowledge that if you're going to survive and this is back to publishing, this is not martial arts anymore. If you're going to survive in the publishing world, you should start acknowledging the fans of martial arts as well as the practitioners, because I think their problem was they wanted to, have a readership that was all practitioners. And that's kind of like, I don't know, well, I have an analogy, but it won't
Right.
fit. It's a long one, but the thing is, there are lots of people out there who think the martial arts are cool. And they love the martial arts, and they'll watch martial arts movies and TV shows, and they'll love commercials that have martial arts references and all this stuff. And they will never set foot into a dojo, ever.
Right.
They're not interested in training or doing any of that, but God, they love the martial arts. And if we had only, the people who made the decisions at Black Belt had, accepted my advice that, hey, invite in the non-practitioners.
Right.
And I thought we could at least triple or quadruple our readership
and survive
very
longer.
easily. And the other thing was they had no belief in the internet. They thought the internet was a
fad.
That the internet was a great place for mail order. That if we put new material online, that people weren't going to buy the magazine or subscribe, which is very limited thinking. And so, it went from being a 180-page magazine to, I don't know, was it 78 or 80 pages now, which is basically a pamphlet, and it's bi-monthly. It's not even monthly anymore.
Well, all magazines are doomed. I mean, that's true. All magazines are doomed. I mean, are they even publishing anymore?
Yes, they are, but the thing is, it's not about the magazine alone anymore. Magazine is just one part of a multiple-pronged, media presence.
Right.
You have an online presence now. People read your stuff on the phone, like newspapers. People read New York Times articles that never touch a hard copy anymore, and so New York Times is still, doing other large things. I think, honestly, if Black Belt is really going to survive and maybe thrive again in the future, what the solution is? Let Disney buy it.
Yeah. If Disney wants
bought
it,
Marvel,
but all you're doing now is building really a website. That's what you have to do, and they weren't even concentrating on that. It was just a lack of understanding, where things are going.
They're conservative. They're conservative-minded fiscally and also culturally. I mean, I think one of the key concepts of martial arts is it's the little guy versus the big guy.
Yeah.
Always. Whether it's on the street or in the fields of China, the Shaolin were priests who were not skilled in wielding swords, and I'm sure they could train with weapons, but that they're peaceful men, right? And so if the king's army decides that they want to come in and boss you around with their swords and their weapons and their horses and spears and so on, what's a lowly farmer going to do? He's got to learn how to use farm implements or maybe even his bare hands to defend. So that's the origin of the martial arts. So when we get into the situation of we need our soldiers to also know the martial arts so they can, even more effectively subjugate the helpless Middle Eastern families who are pushing around, who may or may not be terrorists, but we can't take the chance, so we're gonna, storm in their homes and
now they're actually
arrest people,
recruiting mixed martial artists to teach the military how to fight, because what happens if there's no gun you know, what happens then, you know, the guy's going to kill you.
Yeah.
Or if he has a knife, you know, whoever gets the knife or the gun first is going to win. But a lot of times you'll have, you need to know exactly what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's what was happening in the UFC. You just put two guys in there that talked big their whole life, but their martial arts skills, and they had to, you know, really actually fight, you know?
Yeah, I don't have anything against the you know, the military per se, but when it's, you know, when it's being you know, misused,
yeah, well,
then it's just, you know, then I think it should not be surprising that the little guy will be using, you know, unfamiliar techniques to defend himself, and I think really that's
what sold
where the martial arts came from.
The UFC was they had a little guy who was beating up guys twice his size named Royce Gracie from Brazil. He was a little 180-pound weakling, and he was beating up guys twice his size.
Was it his uncle? Was it his grandfather?
His father. That was. His
grandfather was his grandfather,
that
right?
figured out this, took jiu-jitsu and changed it into something you could actually fight a much larger person with, and it didn't take strength. Used a lot of leverage, and he actually went out in the street and was fighting with it, fighting people, and developed a way to actually fight somebody in a real fight. It was where a lot of martial arts was about looking cool. Looking good.
You know what's so funny was that, like, when I was there, we had a whole thing about. I mean, there's what's interesting is that for a brief period, the UFC, and particularly Dana White, was very, very interested in getting the blessing of Black Belt Magazine. You know, because obviously they wanted to be, you know, seen as legitimate.
Right.
And the martial arts part of the mixed martial arts name needed to be real, needed to be acknowledged. And so when we finally did that, okay, so Helio was the father of Royce. Hickson, Hoyler, Royce, Helson, and Horian. So yeah, Helio was his father. Okay, so Royce's father was a weakling, was a little guy who developed what is now known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He had a brother who was also active, but it was Helio's style that you know, became adopted. So what was I interrupting you with? Oh yeah, so we had a thing one year where we had the Black Belt Business Awards. And we gave the UFC an award for the best reality show for the Ultimate Fighter. The first season, which, you know, really catapulted them into, you know, the public eye.
Made it a company that could make money.
Yeah, I mean, suddenly they were in your living room, and they were no longer a pay-per-view only, you know, sort of rogue.
Suddenly was profitable for them.
What did you call it? Like
no idea.
Human cockfighting, right?
Right.
Human dog fighting. You know, there are all these stupid terms and these you know, politicians who wanted to ban it. You know, like John McCain was.
It was banned there for a long time.
Yeah.
Taken off.
They were very vocal about it. You know.
TV.
Usually because they had friends in the boxing industry and they didn't like their supremacy being challenged. You know, it's a whole other form of cockfighting. Right. But anyway, so we gave them that award, and I remember Dana's speech, you know, at the dinner, and he was practically in tears. He was so happy that we acknowledged the UFC, and it was significant. But from that point on, you know, the more popular they got, the farther and farther back I got seated as a journalist. For they didn't need us anymore.
They didn't care.
You know, once Bud Light came on the scene, you know, we were up in the stands with everybody else. Well, our circulation was
nothing.
It was nil compared to other people. You know, we were just traditional name. We were a brand that people recognized but didn't really read anymore. People would say, "Oh yeah, black belt, yeah."
And then there were these people, all these people who, martial artists who thought they could beat up UFC guys, and then there was some way that there wasn't real fighting or something like that. And they used to actually come into, I guess there's these films, or there used to be these films on the internet of people coming into MMA gyms who were like kung fu guys,
right,
and getting their arms broken and stuff. But these people, these wrestlers, would get them down and elbow them in the face, and these were just challenges of mixed martial artists against traditional.
So is there a lot of that online?
And there used to be a lot of that online, but not anymore. And then there's, once I did see this one thing. It was something in the 70s, and there was this. It was a full contact thing, karate thing. I guess they did hold it in China. Yeah. And Von Cleft was some karate guy, and he was winning it, and he was winning it by knocking people down and then kicking them in the face when they were on the ground. And it was pretty brutal. It was in the 1970s in Japan. Now I can't find it anymore, but I guess that's kind of like the thing that this guy who said he was in Bloodsport said he was in and that he won.
Right.
And of course the guy was never in a fight in his entire life.
It's there was a lot of like kickboxing type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And
kickboxing does work.
Bill Wallace, Superfoot,
right.
was very successful at that in the 70s, and there was a heyday. Who was the other? I don't want to disrespect by not remembering his name. But there are some other figures who I had regular contact with in the magazine because, again, Black Belt's heyday was pretty much the 70s.
Right.
That's 70s and early 80s.
The myth of the super powerful kung fu martial, the secret technique,
secret ninja powers and throwing stars and stuff.
Right.
They would look at the classified ads. And
so order them out of the back of the magazine.
It was a very, very much like the human side of the comic book.
Right.
People look for superheroes in real life who didn't, who thought it was too babyish to read about superheroes that were being drawn, But so we were on the other side of that one, Mark. We didn't compare our collection of black belt magazines that we.
And then you were trying to get them to get martial MMA guys on the cover and make that more important than the magazine, and they grudgingly had to admit that that was where it was going, and then you were.
Yeah, well, we actually, at one point while I was there, we had George St. Pierre on the cover twice in 1 year, which no one else has done.
Right.
We had some people who were invited to be on the cover and either declined or didn't show. Anderson Silva he bailed on us the day of the shoot. They were supposed to be on their way. And his manager, Ed Suarez, I called him, and he's like, "Oh, we just have to stop at the airport on the way." And then I'm calling him back another hour and a half later. Well, what's up? Well, Anderson changed his mind, decided he didn't want to
do the shoot. Wow, weird.
Matt Hughes decided he'd rather go to a hockey game
in
Vegas
and shoot for black belt
to promote, something going on with the UFC. Than get the cover of Black Belt magazine. So it's like, I think some guys didn't realize that there's a very small window of opportunity for them to be on the cover, and if they don't take it, they don't make it, because, I think it wasn't long after that Matt lost to George St. Pierre, and that was it.
Right.
Bye-bye Matt. No one was interested in him on the cover anymore. No one wants a loser on the cover of the magazine. So, George got it twice.
And he's still relevant. He just came back and won a title and then one weight class up.
Who did?
George St. Pierre.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, he beat what's his name?
Bisping.
Yeah.
Bisping. I just heard this thing that was very interesting today. There was a fighter saying, Anderson Silva and people like that were the steroid era of the UFC. These are the guys that were there because they were on steroids and they won and they were doing roids. But he says once they brought in the DNA testing to make sure you're absolutely not on steroids, the people like Bisping, then they become the champion because those are the people that work really hard and didn't ruin their bodies by taking steroids. And I think it's true, now, and they need to because
I think
someone's going to get killed in there if they have steroid athletes.
But the thing is, I think, and you're probably aware of this, is that, a good number of the guys who are taking steroids are doing it to recover from injuries. It's not like they're doing it to get pumped. It's like most guys are fighting injured all the time, 80% of the time. I think I was talking to Chuck Liddell about that, and it was a great time, man. When I think about it, I talked to a lot of the top-notch dudes who will still be legends, like Randy Couture, and Chuck Liddell, and even talked to Tito Ortiz.
Yeah, at this point, those guys weren't huge stars either. They were just guys hanging out, and you could go talk to them.
George St. Pierre was a class act from when he was just a challenger to when he was a champion. He didn't change one bit. He didn't change his tone. He was still a friendly, available guy, who was someone you could talk to. So yeah, he was the class act. Lyoto Machida was really cool. It's too bad that he was kind of forced into being a TV fighter, which he wasn't. He was a very defensive type of fighter. And they want their champs to be aggressive, so his usual style didn't fly. So he got nudged into being an aggressive fighter, and he got beat.
Yeah.
Was that who was the guy? Mauricio Shogun.
Who knocked him out. The first guy to just knock him out. Figured out how to do it. Another Brazilian. Yeah. And now the Brazilians are less and less of a force in martial arts. But
who are the top?
Russians and Americans
and Latinos.
There's starting to be more Latino fighters, and they come from pretty much everywhere. Their female champion was a woman they found in Poland. She was a kickboxer at 100 fights in kickboxing, and then went into MMA and won 10 fights. And she was their champion for a long time, and then she got beaten recently. But that was
any top Armenians.
No, and no more Armenians anymore that I remember. But more and more they come from more of a variety of countries. Because UFC still legitimately will just go anywhere in the world to find a good fighter. If you're good, they're going to put you in there. They're going to sign you, put you in there. Also, it looks like there's some good fighters that are going to come out of China. We will see, but they're looking to find, people who can win. In all the different weight classes. But Americans still are dominating. Brazilians, less and less. But you just see people coming in from weird parts of the
Dutch
world.
Fighters still?
There's still Dutch fighters,
Any Scandinavians out there, maybe?
Yeah, sometimes. There's some from the Middle East, It's weird the people from the Middle East are wrestlers.
Well, sure.
Because of Iran, wrestling is huge in the Middle East, and
Greco-Roman.
Greco-Roman wrestling
that made its way around the continent.
But
for sure.
More and more, there's less of a dominant country. There's just people just coming in from weird countries, Poland.
Weird to Americans.
Weird to Americans.
The thing is,
Russia.
I think I noticed that there were more and more lower weight class fights.
Yeah, and they opened up a lot of lower weight classes. Anymore.
It's all about featherweights and
featherweights
and stuff.
And everyone said, who cares about 145-pound fighters? And then Conor McGregor was a 145-pound fighter and became one of the biggest sports stars of any kind ever. Right. And he came out of MMA, and they had no idea. They just signed, and they're doing what they need to do now. And then the UFC was sold for $5 billion, but they're doing what they need to do to find another Conor McGregor, and that is just continue to sign people, sign the best fighters they can find all over the world, and put on these fights every weekend, every other weekend on cable television.
I'm going to have to pay attention to another event soon, but I have to say, and I hate to. We have to do a second podcast on this because it's Saturday night in Hollywood, and I have a parking spot, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to be there actually. So why don't we call it a call a close to this one?
I don't really know what else we can really say about
blah 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 about it forever.
They fired you eventually.
They let me go because their budget tanked.
They couldn't hire anyone. They weren't selling any more magazines.
They didn't have a print ad budget anymore. It went it dropped by about 2/3.
And they wouldn't listen to you about you need to.
Well, I wanted to be editor
website.
basically, and they didn't want to make me editor.
Right.
So.
That was too bad.
The guy with the ideas gets, shown the door.
Right.
But they were cool. I mean, they gave me severance and all that. But kind of thought I had it. I had it in the bag. I thought I was safe. But that's the economy, man.
They gave you the boot, and also the fact that magazines are just gone. Time Magazine's going. Everything's going anymore. No one wants to hold something in their hand anymore.
Yeah.
So
Except
anyway,
for a phone.
Except for a phone. So anyway, that's the end of this podcast about working for a failed kung fu magazine. That's it. Kung fu and the beginning of the UFC. Thanks, Ed Pollard.
Right.
Where can we find Eddie online?
Selzer. Well, actually, I do this thing now called Meet a Typer, which is about me going out to public places like bookstores, and it's going to be schools and libraries now too, where I bring a selection from my collection of manual portable typewriters, now that people use typewriters.
Who've never touched them before.
Probably not, yeah.
That's interesting. So there's a website for that?
Yeah, meetatyper.com.
All right.
Straight up.
So find Ed at meetatyper.com and go and touch one of these weird things that people actually used to have, that you push little keys and it makes ink marks on a piece of paper.
Yeah, you don't even need a cable and a printer and toner cartridges and batteries and shit. You hit the key and it prints right onto the paper, and you got to think about what you're going to write before you write it. Oh my God, what a concept.
What a concept. There used to also
slow down long enough to think about what you want to say.
There used to also be these things called drums before we had drum machines, and they were actual round things.
Yeah,
you pounded on with a stick, and they made noise. Now you just have drum machines. This archaic thing that
this quaint old world
used
where
to have.
things happened in meat space.
You had to have a stick, and you hit it, and it would make a noise. It was before drum machines and rap music. Anyway, thanks. Oh, and what was an ear? What was the thing about the ear? You were inventing something called...
Oh. Well, no, that's the enhanced auditory receptor.
Yeah, yes.
You can receive messages through the air.
Without the use of a cell phone.
A phone, yeah. You could, phone-free receiving of messages.
Phone-free. It's
through the air.
It's called the
with
ear.
The enhanced auditory receptor, the EAR.
Enhanced auditory, the EAR. It's the new thing.
Yeah, chances are you might have a pair.
Ed's new invention, the EAR.
The time has come, I think.
The time has come.
Technology has arrived.
Yes, it's arrived. It's here. The ear. All right. Thanks a lot, Ed.
All right, you got it, man.